La prossima volta che ci vediamo vogliamo vedere se l'avete fatto veramente più veloce di Brandon.
Okay, and go. Two, and the main thing when dribbling is have a wide base, okay? I don't want you standing like this because you have no balance, okay? Get your feet right outside, so my feet come up right outside of my shoulders.
Ok, la cosa più importante quando facciamo questi esercizi di ball handling è che la base delle vostre gambe deve essere larga, almeno larga quanto le vostre spalle, per poter gestire meglio il pallone. Tutto parte dalle gambe, quindi dovete essere...
Put a hole in the floor.
Dovete fare un buco per terra.
Crossovers inside our knees, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Feast. Don't be stiff. I don't want.
Quindi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
30 seconds and go. 1, 2, 3, step cross. Good. Keep it going, keep it going.
Basketball was introduced to me at 10 years old. I started out in a similar fashion at my local YMCA, my local community center. But I want to say a little bit before I get started about myself, what you guys have done. You know, over the last hour and a half, you guys got a chance to be introduced to combine drills, stuff that I didn't get a chance to experience until I got to the NBA. So you guys are getting a huge advantage with EPLAY, having the opportunity to be exposed to these kind of combine drills.
Hey Chuck, it's customary. I usually I welcome everybody to kind of bob. If you feel it, it's fine. It's quite all right. Another edition of the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast, episode 16. I am Jamie Horton here with you as always. Follow me on Twitter at EPLAYJamie. You can also follow us at EPLAY Basketball on Twitter and Instagram. EPLAYJamie is also my Instagram handle as well. Also, we invite you to check out all the stuff that we're doing at EPLAYBasketball.com. Trying to revolutionize the game, players first, one player at a time. EPLAYBasketball.com. It is the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. Once again, I am Jamie Horton, and I am so proud and pleased and happy to be joined by the great Chuck Cooperstein at Coop Mavs on Twitter. I don't know. Do you have an Instagram? Do you have an Instagram, Chuck?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. Well, that's all right. That's okay. So if you did, it would be Coop Mavs, probably.
Probably.
All right. Fair enough. So, Chuck, this is a treat for me. I grew up wanting to be in broadcasting. He's the voice of the Dallas Mavericks. Also, you can be heard in the DFW area. What's that time? Is it 9 to 1 on ESPN Radio?
I'm just filling in. I don't do a regular talk show, but I work for a 103.3 FM ESPN.
Perfect. So I grew up listening to sports talk radio. I remember your days at the Ticket. There's a famous drop that I still have in my head sometimes. Was that a coffee mug breaking?
No. That was a table. That was a table.
That's fantastic.
Slammed the table. It was after a Mavericks Lakers game, And I don't even remember what the details of it were, but this caller on a post game show was trying to explain to me, how you know how the Lakers did what they did versus the Mavericks did what they did, and I just kept getting more and more exercised to the point where I felt like I just had to hit the table to make a point, which I probably shouldn't have done, but it has become somewhat legendary over there. So
It's fantastic.
Hey, right?
So it's a great memory for me, that's for sure. I grew up.
We all have our moments, and that was one of them.
Look, I grew up listening to Randy Galloway was my hero for being from Fort Worth. So, I mean, I would get picked up from school and I would tell my parents, either one of them, whoever picked me up, to turn it to WBAP because I had to listen to Randy in the afternoons or whenever I had the opportunity to. And so I grew up having this dream of being in sports radio. I wanted to do talk radio. I had the small opportunity to do it for almost a decade out in deep East Texas and in the Shreveport area. And calling games play-by-play was one of the best experiences of my life, because that's what I grew up listening to games on the radio. Obviously, have listened to you call Mavs games for, geez, I don't know how many years now. What, 20? 15? Yeah. So we're moving towards two. If we were doing decimals, we could round up to 20. We can call it 2 decades. So for about 2 decades, I've been listening to you do Mavs games, and I actually remember that's what I do, especially when we get to the playoffs and things like that, where local TV broadcasts kind of get gone away, and so I listen to the radio. So I still have in my head that call from 2011. The Mavs have scaled the NBA mountain and have planted their flag. And I was like, I got the chills. I get the chills still thinking about it, because it was one of those things as a sports fan and as a following teams. Those are things that you remember. But I have to ask you a broadcasting question. Was that do you ever think about what you might say at that point, or do those things just happen? When you get to that point, you see that the 000s are headed that way, and you know that you have an opportunity at a moment here to say something about this team winning a championship. What goes through your mind at that point?
It's not scripted, but there's a thought, that runs through your mind, and my thought at the time was, well, what's the hardest thing in the world to do? And that's to scale Mount Everest. And I was thinking of Edmund Hillary at the time. And so, the Mavericks had been in existence since 1980. That was their 31st season in the NBA. And, here they were, it took them 31 years to get to that point. And so, and then when you reach that point, when you reach the summit of the mountain, what do?
Plant your flag.
You plant a flag. So what did Neil Armstrong do and Buzz Aldrin do when they went to the moon on Apollo 11? What did they do? They planted a flag. So, so I had that imagery in my head, and I just wanted to make sure I didn't blow the call. I mean, that's the one thing that is absolutely terrifying in that situation, because you're chronicling history, and you want to make sure you chronicle it correctly. But most importantly, you want to, for the fans who know, like you, 9 years after the fact, that it's something that's going to be there forever. You want to make sure you get it right.
Yeah, and all due respect to Mike Breen and the folks over at ABC and Disney, I had you guys muted because I wanted to hear the local. I wanted to hear Chuck. I wanted to hear Chuck and watch the game on TV. I think also from a broadcaster's perspective, Chuck, is you're a part of that team. You travel with that team. You get to see these guys. You get to talk to these guys. You're entrenched. So do you also get that feeling that you're a part of that championship as well, where it's like, this is my guys. These are my guys. I'm here as a member of this team and as a part of this. What were the feelings there as well? Because you can hear the excitement. That's one thing I love about you. I can always hear the emotions, and I love that.
Well, that's, to me, it's what sports is. It's passion, it's emotion, and it's fun. But no, as much as I do spend time, around the team, I travel with them, I'm in the hotel with them, I know them and they know me. I wasn't in all those meetings. I wasn't getting taped up to play every game. Yes, it was important that the Mavericks win, but my life was not defined by whether or not they won or lost, and I wasn't certainly going to be paid whether or not they won or lost. So for me, the fact that I got a championship ring is still kind of mind blowing to me, because again, I didn't shoot a basket, I didn't call a timeout, I didn't tape anybody's ankles, I didn't make arrangements for the team to travel when they travel. Any of those things that go into the daily life of an NBA team, I was not a part of that. What I was a part of was describing what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make me more of an insider? I guess I'll leave that for others to decide. But for the most part, I'm not employed by the team. I mean, the team, my arrangement with the Mavericks is that my radio station actually pays me, and that they pay my travel and they pay my per diem. So it's kind of a hybrid deal. But clearly, I identify with them. I wanted desperately for them to win, as much as any Mavericks fan wanted them to win. But am I part of the team? I think that's probably going a little bit too far.
Sure.
I think they appreciate me for what I do. I know Rick Carlisle appreciates me for what I do, and I think I have a really good relationship with him, and I have a really good relationship with, and have had a really good relationship with a lot of the players. But again, it's I'm not there every day. I'm not there for every practice. I'm not there for every film session. All those things. So it's hard to say that I'm actually part of the team.
Okay, I understand. No, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. And by the way, this is the Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. We are a basketball analytics company, but as a person with a background, or having tried to live the life and follow my dreams and chase my dreams, I'm going to nerd out a little bit before you guys get crazy here, because I have personal questions I got to ask Chuck. How cool is it to sit courtside and watch the best athletes in the world, though, for 80, 100 nights a year, or however long? I mean, that's got to be, what's that like?
It's the best. It's what makes it special. I think for me, not necessarily for everybody, but for me, as I plotted getting into the business, the goal for me always, and the question that had to be answered, was, how am I getting to the game? I didn't want to sit in a studio behind a microphone for 4 hours a day and just yammer. I could do it, and I have done it, but the games are the thing, because without the games, we don't have any of this. There's no reason to talk about any of this. That's kind of how I look at it.
And you got to sit and watch the big German play for his entire career. It's
well, I did the last 2/3 of his career.
Okay, sure, yeah, that's right.
And it's funny, because when he started, I really wasn't working much with the Mavericks at that time. I was doing radio, but actually I was working at WBAP at the time, and we had the Stars, and the Stars were winning Stanley Cups and getting to Cup Finals, and we're one of the best teams in the NHL. And I was doing, their pregame and their postgame for that, while I was trying to, still figure out what was going on with the Mavericks and keeping track of them and all that. But obviously everything changed for me when our radio station got the rights to the Mavericks back in the summer of 2001. And then, I was doing pre and post, and, when they decided to move Mark Followill over the TV, I was in a position to move in at that point. But, the idea of having Dirk, and then, immediately following that up with Luka, makes this special. And just to your point, you're watching the best players in the world do their thing every single night. Like the worst NBA player is like so much better than the average college basketball player.
Yeah, he'd just tear up any rec league.
I always find the arguments from the college from the college people who hate the NBA, and say how much better a game that the college game is, and how much more coaching there is, and that the college guys play defense and the NBA guys don't. I said, y'all just really need to pay attention. Okay, you really need to pay attention.
Appreciate the passion.
It's yeah. I mean, look, what college has is that Allen Fieldhouse is different from Cameron Indoor Stadium, which is different from Gallagher Arena. Where in the NBA we all have 20,000 seat arenas. We all have screaming PA guys. We all shoot T-shirts in the stands. We're a best practices league, in a lot of ways. But as it relates to the actual playing of the game, there is no comparison. Which game is better?
Chuck, before we get into some of the more important stuff that I'm I'm obligated to talk to you about, having you on the Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. We've had no basketball. March 12th. I'm watching the Mavs and the Nuggets. And
I'm sorry, I need to move this around because the lighting's probably.
Oh, not a problem, man. It's been fine. No, so I guess it was mid-March. I'm watching the same game as you, the Mavs, and I believe the Nuggets there, and the Mavs get their 40th win of the season, and mid-game or whatever, or in the third quarter there, we get this reaction. Oh, we're going to take a break and come back. We got some big news. And then they come back leading with Mark Cuban's face reacting on the sideline. So we've all been without sports, been without basketball for 4 months now. How have you handled this? What have you done? Have you been reading books? You've been how do you handle this, man? How's this been going? How's quarantine and COVID been treating Chuck Cooperstein?
I can't say that I've handled it great because I desperately miss what I miss and what you miss, what so many others miss. I've been doing some radio. Basically my off season, what I would do in the summertime, I started doing in March, which is filling in for guys when they go on vacation, and either doing our mid morning show or afternoon drive show. But I did not watch very many old games or anything like that. The only old games I think I really watched were some of the Mavericks old games. But I didn't do much of that. For the first 6 weeks or so, golf courses were closed. So that was very difficult for me. When they opened on May 1st, I started playing a little bit and just, trying to get out of the house. But other than 45 minutes a day of walking my dog around the lake, reading a few Grisham and Baldacci books, catching up on some Netflix and the Amazon Prime stuff. Like I had never seen The Wire. When it came out in the early aughts, I'd never seen it. Never the greatest show ever. It was really good. I don't know it was the greatest show ever.
Same.
But certainly one that you had to pay attention to. But I binge watched all 5 seasons and enjoyed it. Did a few other things, but that's about it. I mean, I'm ready for this to all ramp up and see how far we can take it. And at least so far, I think the signs from the NBA in Orlando are very hopeful, and I just hope it can continue. That we can get all the way to October and end this thing, and with a champion, then take a little more downtime and see if we can better figure out what's going on in the world and get people back into the arena and sort of have a sense of normalcy that obviously we've not had since March.
Yeah, for me, I've eaten a lot of cereal, so I don't know what's going on there, but I've loved cereal during this quarantine time, and it has not been too kind to me. That's interesting because in 2 months after this little 2 month sprint to the finish line, or this, we're going to play basketball again. Are is the Christmas Day thing starting next year? Or how does that work?
They haven't said. They first said December 1st. The players were not particularly excited about the idea of turning it around that fast. Although, really, when you think about it, if you got to December 1st, I mean, you'd have October, November off and start. And for a lot of these teams, and especially the 8th that aren't even in Orlando, you've got people who are not going to have played basketball in a long time. I mean, there's going to be a competitive advantage, I think, at least early on, for those teams that actually, did go to Orlando to play for however many games they play, whether it's the 8 seeding games or however many games they wind up playing extra in the playoffs. But I think that Christmas is the more logical place to go with that. I would like to see them permanently start on Christmas and go through August. I don't think they're going to do that. It sounds like they're very committed to the Olympics or worried about the Olympics. I don't know that they necessarily should be worried about the Olympics, which is going to be on the other side of the world, and the results are going to be known by the time most of us in the United States wake up. It's a live TV world now and a live radio world. It's, the information is seen instantaneously. It's not like it's not like the 1980 Olympics in Lake Placid where you can hold the result of that game and hope that nobody knows. So I don't necessarily agree with that idea of trying to get things done before the Olympics. And even by starting later, does that mean they're going to cut the schedule back? We all talked about load management. And, we know what happened the last time we had a lockout and we had a bunch of 3 games in 3 nights. I don't think anybody wants to see that. But at the same time, the more games they play, the more money there is for both the owners and the players. So that's a lot to consider for everyone.
And the NHL has done a hell of a job every 4 years with figuring out how they do the Olympic break when they basically have their.
Yeah, but there's a big difference though, because now again in the new NHL agreement, they're going to agree to have the players go to the next 2 Olympics. I guess Beijing in 22 and Milan, Italy in 26. But remember, this last Olympics in South Korea, the NHL did not allow their players to go. And the players were not happy about it. And, it shuts the league down for 3 weeks. In the NBA's case, if you were going to shut it down, then given the schedule we're talking about, that's the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're in the playoffs at that point, and that's not going to happen. But at the same time, the NBA knows it's not just for the U.S. team, but for so many players who are international and who want to play for their teams in the Olympics and play for their countries in the Olympics, that it's really important for them to do. So, I mean, there's a lot of balls that they've got to juggle to try to figure all that out.
I do agree. I do like the idea of having opening day of the NBA on Christmas Day, though. I like that being the centerpiece to move forward. I think for me, selfishly, also because we get to this point in April, May, and June where once basketball and hockey ends, it's baseball for months until we get to football and everything else. I love baseball.
The NBA has already pretty much over the last 20 years, declared Christmas to be their opening day. 30% of the season is played, but I mean, that when the schedule comes out in August, and right away, what do they do? What are they showcasing right away? Mm-hmm. Those 5 games that we played on Christmas Day, they're putting their best teams and their biggest stars on Christmas Day. Why? Because it obviously works for them. So, why do that at the 30% mark when you can do it at the beginning of the season and carry it through to where you'll have minimal competition through the summer, the occasional major golf tournament, occasional major tennis tournament, but you've got, Major League Baseball on a daily basis, and that's pretty much it. So I would think that NBA playoff games would be of far greater value than, game 78 of the Major League Baseball season.
I completely agree.
Again, there are so many other things to consider. For instance, from the TV standpoint, the TV people want that fall programming. And if you didn't have the NBA in September and October because you were playing on a December to August schedule, what are they going to fill it with? They've had enough time, hard time filling what they have right now with no sports. And to know that every year you would not have basketball for those 2 or 3 months, I think would be very difficult for them. So, again, 8 zillion balls for them to juggle, and people much smarter than I am are going to try to figure that thing out.
And if your baseball team's not any good, you basically don't have any sports until training. It's all training camp talk until August and September. Chuck, I got to ask you this. I want to get to the nuts and bolts of this thing because we talked about Christmas Day. I think it's a perfect segue because it would be a travesty if this Dallas Mavericks team, especially with the guys like the star power of Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis, weren't playing on Christmas Day in the next year or two. You've seen this team. You've been around this team. How far ahead of schedule is this basketball team? How good is this basketball team?
I think they're a little bit ahead of schedule. I mean, I think there was always the possibility of them making the playoffs this year. I'm a little surprised that it wound up becoming as easy for them to make it as it was, because I don't think anybody was counting on Golden State and San Antonio pretty much falling off the face of the earth. But having said that, I mean, if they had just been able to win a few close games, That's been their Achilles heel all year. But if they win, even a fragment of the games that they didn't win, I mean, you're looking at a team right now that has the profile of a 47-win team.
Mm-hmm.
That would be ahead of the Clippers. They'd be just behind the Lakers in the Western Conference. So from that standpoint, you'd have to say that they're a little bit ahead of schedule. But as everything is judged by how you perform in the playoffs, we don't really know the answer to that because the playoffs aren't here yet. And even when the playoffs come, regardless of how they turn out, they're just going to be so bizarre because all the dynamics that go into a playoff series, the fans, the travel, just the media crush and all that stuff, none of that exists or will exist. So it's a legitimate question, but I don't know that there's a real definitive answer.
Sure.
But generally speaking, how they played, I mean, I would think you'd have to think that they're a little bit ahead of schedule because nobody saw Doncic making this jump this soon. I mean, they all knew he was great, had a great rookie year, but to see him play at an all-NBA level, which he has, I mean, I think it'll be stunning if he's not at least a second-team all-NBA player this year. And to see Porzingis come back as he's come back, and especially over those last 15 games or so before the stoppage, I mean, you look at that and say, I mean, does any team in the NBA have two players of that ilk, 25 years old or younger, playing at that level? So, I mean, the talent was there. And then I think, the fact that Donnie Nelson went out and got Seth Curry back, has just helped dramatically because the idea was to surround Luka with shooters. And Curry is shooting and certainly was shooting before the stoppage at just a ridiculous clip. I mean, just an absurdly ridiculous clip, but better than 53% from three-point range since February 1st, basically probably the last 13, 14 games that they played. Tim Hardaway became a really valuable player to this team, basically thrown into the deal, as a poison pill for the Mavericks. Instead, he's become a really valuable player for them to the point where when we get to the offseason, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the Mavericks and his agent try to get together on a long-term deal. He fits that well, with this group. So they've got a lot going for them talent-wise, and obviously they're expertly coached, which, given everything that's going on here and the dynamics of the bubble, I mean, you'd have to believe that they've got more than a puncher's chance, when they tee this thing up and whoever they wind up playing in the first round of playoffs. I don't think that team is going to want to see the Mavericks because I think the Mavericks can make life very, very difficult for whoever they play.
Chuck, and that's another great way to segue here because, I mean, I read NBA stuff all the time. And obviously right now, nobody can picture or imagine what this thing is going to look like or what these teams are going to look like. Nobody knows if the Lakers are going to be the same Lakers or the Bucks are going to be the same. We just can't tell. I mean, because you stop immediately and then you have 4 months off and then you got to figure this thing out in a couple of weeks. And the month of July gets here and then everybody's back to playing, or at least, the teams that are there. So I think it's one of these deals where none of us can really kind of say, oh, that's a favorite or this is a that. The Mavericks right now are kind of a sexy dark horse team by a lot of these folks that are saying this team is a team to watch out for. They're young. They don't know any better. You've got Luka. You don't really know what you're looking at. But also the 3 months layoff here for KP, I think, would do wonders for getting him off his knees and getting him off his legs a little bit, getting him that extra rest and things. Do you believe, obviously, I agree with you. I think this is not a team you want to see in the first round. I don't want to sit here and say this team has a legitimate chance to make a run. But do you believe that they have, in this sort of environment, that there's a chance at a run that this team could make? Because there's so many question marks and what ifs and what have yous.
Well, again, their offense before the stoppage was performing at a historic rate. They were just out of sight. I mean, they kind of figured out, the balance of the three true outcomes, as taking as many threes as they take. They take 41 a game, but they make them. It's one thing to take shots. I mean, if you're the Rockets, you're taking 45 a game, but you're shooting under 35%, and you're 23rd in the league. And you look at the Mavericks, who are taking 41 a game, and they're making about 37% plus. I mean, they were eighth in the league. You know, they're eighth in the league in 3-point percentage. It's one thing to take the shots; it's another thing to be able to make them. And the Mavericks, it's not only the shots that they take; it's the quality of the shots that they take. And Doncic is so good at drawing people to him that as long as he's got people that he can throw it to, you know, he's going to find the open man, and that guy, you know, is rarely going to have a contested shot. And if you're taking uncontested or lightly contested 3-point shots, you have a chance to do some real damage. And I think that's what the Mavericks are going to be counting on. Just the ability, you know, to play that game and play it as efficiently as they have, and you know, from their standpoint, maybe play a little bit better defense and make a few more free throws. And if they can do that, yeah, why not? And again, where everybody is right now, nobody knows exactly who's who and what's what.
Chuck, you mentioned some percentages there, and obviously this is where we kind of talk about the analytics, because I like having voices on here that are either pro or for or against, or you know, understand why they're used, et cetera, and that being one of those stats, right? The amount of 3-pointers that we've seen really over the last 15 years, I guess, has increased. The art of the mid-range game has sort of gone away, so it's threes and layups. In terms of the analytics and being a broadcaster, I think obviously the perspective from a broadcaster would be a whole lot different as somebody who's in a front office looking at the numbers, because you want to be relatable and you want to be able to explain these things to a layman or somebody like me who's just listening and wouldn't understand all the nerd stuff. Explain to me, if you could, we talked a little bit about this before we got on the air, about how analytics are maybe applied in this business, or what you would use or what you don't use, and what you do and don't like about them as a whole. Do you think they're good for the game?
Well, I think the game is not as good, and especially because the athletes are better than they've ever been. I mean, the athletic ability of NBA players is absolutely off the chart, and I don't know that it's totally displayed because we've decided to play, you know, drive and kick basketball, or you know, drive to the rim and either score there or get fouled and shoot free throws. You know, baseball's gotten itself into big trouble with a 3 true outcome game of home runs, strikeouts, and walks. And I think basketball is in many ways headed down that same road. You know, there's just something beautiful about somebody like Rolando Blackman or Rip Hamilton, Reggie Miller coming off of a curl screen and curling from 18, catching it and rising, firing, and scoring. There's just something really pretty and aesthetically pleasing about that. At times, the NBA game is not aesthetically pleasing. I mean, I can understand the mathematical formulas and why they want to do what teams do what they want to do, but I just don't necessarily think it's good for the game that they play that way.
All right, that's fair.
And then from a broadcast standpoint, I mean, there are some numbers that actually do make a little sense. And this is not necessarily something that I would use while the game is going on, but offensive rating and defensive rating are important. And I do think that they are, in the grand scheme, more illustrative than points per game, because games go to overtime, and teams can play. You can play 4 overtime games like the Mavericks, or I think the NBA leader played 8 overtime games this year. I mean, San Antonio, I don't think played an overtime game until like their next to last game. I mean, they had gone all year without playing one. So the numbers, points per game and what have you, are generally or a little bit skewed. When you have something that's a true number that's measuring everyone, like points per possession, or by example, take it out farther and points per 100 possessions. That's a fair way to look at things, and maybe gives you some insight into who's who and what's what. Of course, I find it interesting from the Mavericks standpoint that they have, I believe, the 6th best net rating in the league, and yet here they are, probably with the 13th best record overall. So what does that mean? So you have that number, but they have this record. So you got to go elsewhere to try to find out why they are where they are. I mean, so it may not be the most illustrative number that you could come up with, but I do think just as a whole, when you're measuring against the whole, it's a pretty good way to look at. But I look at rebound percentage. I think is a pretty good number to look at. Now, again, I won't use this during the game. I might use this in a pregame situation because, again, if you're asking me or a stat guy to try to do percentages like that on the fly, I mean, it's way too much. It's, I can do basic fractions real fast. I mean, I have help from a stat monitor too, but, I can tell you that, if you're 5 for 16, you're 31.3%. Okay. I get that. But rebound percentages, and especially offensive rebound percentages, I think are pretty illustrative, more so than the actual rebound margin that exists. I think that's probably better. But things like turnover, turnover percentage, that is not in almost every case that I've ever seen any different really than what your total turnovers are per game and where you rank in the NBA. Assist percentage. I guess those are the two pretty much. That just as an example, really, they don't. I mean, the Mavericks have always been a low turnover team. So whether they average 12.1 turnovers and have a turnover ratio or a turnover percentage of 12.1 or 12.2, what difference does it make? Why use that as opposed to using the number that, hey, yeah, they turn it over 12.1 times a game? That makes a whole lot more sense to me. So, I mean, that's kind of where I am on that. I mean, I am not anti-analytics by any stretch. I do worry about the aesthetic look of the game as it is entertainment, and we want our fans to be happy with what they're looking at. Sometimes I feel like they're not. And I just want them want to make sure that what we're doing is the best way to explain and display what the greatest basketball players in the world are actually doing.
And I think you'd mentioned also you used the example of they're the sixth best net rating, but then 13th ranked somewhere else in terms of, or having the 13th best record. So I think sometimes these metrics, do you think they could get like a little bit too much, right? So for example, over the last few years, I think the clutch stat, I think the Mavericks are one of the most competitive teams in the league in terms of being within a certain point for a range within the last 5 minutes of a ball game. Even Dennis Smith Jr.'s rookie season, I think they were like second in the league in terms of the amount of games played within that clutch stat.
Right.
So do you think sometimes it gets watered down because there's stats within stats within stats and metrics within metrics within metrics?
Well, but again, now to use the Mavericks as an example, their clutch numbers are really important because that tells the story of why they're at 40 and 27 as opposed to maybe 47 and 20 and second in the West. I mean, when you look at their not just the clutch record, but your clutch field goal percentage, your clutch 3-point percentage, your clutch free throw percentage, which was a huge problem for them. And then, where it gets into the micro is and the NBA allows you to do this if you spend any time on their stat site, which is if you really want to get yourself lost for a day and just go number on top of number, go into the NBA stat site, they can break it down, 3 minutes to play, 2 minutes to play, 30 seconds to play. And you can do it by whether you're 5 points behind or, plus or minus 5 points, plus or minus 1 point. I mean, you can really get lost in the grand scheme, which is why I will use the clutch stats because, and certainly in the case of the Mavericks, it tells a really important story about their season, but I will use just the general clutch stat of, their, whatever their rankings are, field goal, 3-point free throw. Not even so much points, because I don't know that points really matter in that situation. But it's how are you playing? How is your offense in that situation?
I think ultimately the interesting point here, Coop, is that you're watching these games and you're calling everything that you see, right? So it's sort of like what we call the naked eye, right? The naked eye scouting, and then the numbers are completely different. Sometimes they tell the same story. It's just a matter of how you break it down. This will never go away. The ability to watch and see the way players perform, the way they move, the way they move without the basketball, the way they move with the basketball, the way that they do those little things, those athletic things, that will never seemingly go away. Do you think that sort of plays a role in the way that you look at the numbers also, is the fact that you're actually just watching the games and the players and the movements a lot more than just looking down at a stat sheet?
Probably because I trust my eyes. I do
Sure.
trust what I see. But I mean, again, a lot of the analytics are not necessarily broadcast friendly. But for instance, where do you shoot your 3-pointers from? If you're a guy like PJ Tucker in Houston or Dorian Finney-Smith for the Mavericks, you take the vast majority of your 3-pointers from the corner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you make sure that you're in the corner, and now you can break it down. Which corner? Left corner, right corner. What do you shoot from each of them? And for the teams, that's really important. I mean, it's because it's how do you design your offense? How do you design the action to make sure that you get the shot that you want? For me, it's less important unless the number is just extraordinary. I mean, good or bad. Most of in this case, we'd really be looking at it from a good standpoint. If you're a 37% 3-point shooter, but you're shooting well over 50 in the corner, well, that's pretty dramatic. Maybe even more so if you're just an average 3-point shooter, but you shoot great from the corners, or maybe you just defy, like a guy like Dirk, who shot very few corner threes in his career. And the corner three is the shot that everybody wants to try to get, right, today? But where did Dirk take the vast majority of his threes from? From the top of the arc, generally is the trail five,
Mm-hmm.
coming down and just stepping into that one. And, he obviously shot them really well, but it's like, where are you comfortable shooting them from? And I think, again, for the teams, that's more important than necessarily it is for me on the broadcast, other than to point out if there's something really dramatic, again, using the Finney-Smith and Tucker examples, that, hey, that's where these guys really love to shoot the ball from.
I think there's a marriage here. I think I think ultimately for us, we believe that it's something that benefits players. And I think the future, right, of analytics is something that they've been used against players for so long, especially when it comes to the negotiating table. And that's sort of where I think that companies like ours try to sort of emphasize the player first model in terms of using analytics to improve your game, and then ultimately, I think, provide more parity, right? Especially in other spaces. I think the women's game could use a lot more parity, or finding these players that, analytically speaking, do more things that might get overlooked to go to these Division I or larger Division II schools and things like that. But I think we're on the same page, Coop. So I won't even ask you any more about that, because we're going to move on, because I think we agree, and I think everybody saw that. I want to ask you about how this is going to work, this bubble in Orlando. How are we going to be able to consume our Mavericks? How are we going to be able to consume the NBA when this thing starts in 17 days? How are we going to be able to hear you? What are you going to do? Where are you?
Okay, well, I'm not in the bubble.
All right.
Although there are times when I wish I was in the bubble. Given how things apparently are in Texas right now, I think the bubble might be a whole lot safer, even if the bubble is in Florida. But just for the historical aspect of it, which, to me, chronicling history is really important. It's at our heart. Yes, we are, we're entertainers because we're doing something that's fun and making other people happy. But, in the end, we are chroniclers of history, and that's what is taking place in Orlando right now. So I do miss not being a part of that, and I miss not being around the team, because pretty much I have maybe a little more access than the average fan does, but not significantly more access than what fans do, to try to really get a sense of what they're doing, how they're feeling, what what a particular game is going to look like, or anything like that. So I do miss that. But having said that, that's the way of the world. And I'll be working out of the Mavericks locker room at the American Airlines Center. We did that before the beginning of the 18-19 season when the Mavericks went to China. When we did those early morning games from Shanghai and from Shenzhen. We have a table set up. We've got a 55 or 60-inch monitor in the room with the clean feed from the NBA. That will include graphics. I'll use my laptop to access NBA Courtside, which is basically what the stat monitors are in the building, except that they're actually a little bit better for us for broadcast purposes. I can put in a plug for it because I helped design it along with the NBA. We had a lot of input into how it was going to work. So, I'll have my engineer there, and he'll mix the sound from whatever sound is in the gym. Brad and I'll be there, and we'll call it. And you know what? At least early on, it's going to be surreal. I mean, I can't even imagine that game against the Rockets. 3 minutes to go. Mavericks down 1. Luka takes the ball down the lane, hangs, scores, fouled.
Silence.
In a normal situation, you're going to punch it. You're going to punch it really hard. So what does it sound like when I punch it? And the only sound you're hearing is the reaction from the benches. It's going to be strange. It's going to take some time to get used to. But at least I've done it. And while it's not perfect, and you're at the mercy of the director because he's only showing you what he's showing you, and you might want to be looking for something else that's not there. That's the way it is, and we'll make it work because we always make it work.
Will the guys in the truck, right? The people that are going to have to figure out ways to what I'm interested in hearing is some of the trash talk, the ability to hear a lot of these things that'll happen on the court. Somebody's going to earn their money when it comes to dropping those things, Chuck. I'm afraid. Are they going to pump crowd noise into these things? Or?
I think that's still being talked about. I haven't seen anything from the league. I also saw something that suggested that the games, some games might actually go to tape delay, which would just be a horrific thing to do. You again, in an instantaneous world, you can't do that, but they want to try to bleep everything out, make sure that everything is bleeped everything out. I don't think you can get away with doing that.
It's cable TV.
The guy on the dump button, he's going to be working overtime. I would hope that maybe. I say this that the FCC would let the NBA slide, but we just went through 10 episodes of The Last Dance on ESPN with Michael Jordan throwing F-bombs left and right. Seemed to be okay. Now when the games are on ABC, maybe that's different because it's over the air as opposed to cable. I don't know. I mean, there are people a lot smarter than I am who were paid to figure this thing out. But from a TV standpoint, I could absolutely see why you want it and why it absolutely would work. From a radio standpoint, I think it would be far more difficult because, again, you can't see. I've got to be able to explain to you, what I'm seeing so that then you can see. And mixing and laying out to mix in the sound from the floor. I don't think that's going to work very often. Now, the one time that I think that it could work, and again, it could be dangerous. Bang bang play at the rim. It's an and one. Coach goes nuts. You may want to lay out. You might hear the conversation between the coach and the referee and just see where that goes. But again. From a radio standpoint, that may be the one time where you can do it, but you can't necessarily do it for too long. TV, you can do it as long as you want because, again, while we're both broadcasting, they're just very different forms of broadcasting.
17 days away, where we finally get to hear the voice of Chuck Cooperstein and Brad Davis, not courtside, but it'll be courtside in our hearts and in our minds for sure. So July 31st, right? The Mavs and the Rockets?
Mavs and the Rockets, 8:00.
And then you got some matinees on like Tuesdays and stuff. That's going to be weird.
We're going to play 3 exhibitions. We're or what they're calling scrimmages against the Lakers next Thursday, Indiana on the following Sunday, and then Philadelphia. That's the 26th, and then Philadelphia on the 28th. And we're going to do all those as well. And what it's important for me, just as important for the players. I need to get some reps in, and I need to see, more importantly, just how everything is going to work. Which is why they are having these. It's not even so much for us as it is for the for the TV camera people and for the game ops of the NBA. Just to go from page 1 of the manual through whatever the end is, and make sure that all of this works. And so that's why they're doing it the way they're doing it, and we're just the beneficiaries of it, because we're going to see their camera angles and get used to how they're showing us the game, so that we can make the adjustments that we need to make.
He's Chuck Cooperstein, voice of the Dallas Mavericks, 2011 NBA champion Dallas Mavericks. It feels like it was yesterday, but then I look at the calendar and it was a long time ago. But it's time to make a run. It's time to this new era of Mavericks basketball. If you're a Mavericks fan, it is a great time to be a Mavs fan and be excited about what you've got in front of you with the Lukas and the KPs of the world and the Currys. It's all there right now, and the opportunity is in front of us for some really exciting stuff. So I encourage you guys to all take a listen to 103.3 FM ESPN and listen to the voice of Chuck Cooperstein, the voice of the Dallas Mavericks, at Coop Mavs on Twitter as well. Chuck, I appreciate you doing this so much. I'd love to have you back. I'd also we're friends now. Maybe I could get you to hook me up with Brad Davis and maybe get him on the show. I'd love to talk analytics with a guy who wore shorts that, basically looked like underwear some 20, 30 years ago or something like that, and see what he thinks about him. It'd be fun. I went to Brad Davis basketball camps when I was a kid.
That was fun to hear that. Brad does not do a lot of these types of things, but I'll throw it his way and see what he has to say.
Appreciate it, Chuck. Thank you so much. At Coop Mavs on Twitter. I am Jamie Horton at EPLAY Jamie. You can follow us at EPLAY Basketball on Twitter and Instagram. EPLAY Jamie on Twitter and Instagram as well. Episode 16, the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast is in the books. Until next time, stay tuned, everybody.
La prossima volta che ci vediamo vogliamo vedere se l'avete fatto veramente più veloce di Brandon.
Okay, and go. 2, and the main thing when dribbling is have a wide base. Okay, I don't want you standing like this because you have no balance. Okay, get your feet right outside, so my feet come up right outside of my shoulders.
Ok, la cosa più importante quando facciamo questi esercizi di ball handling è che la base delle vostre gambe deve essere larga, almeno larga quanto le vostre spalle, per poter gestire meglio il pallone. Tutto parte dalle gambe, quindi dovete essere...
A hole in the floor.
Dovete fare un buco per terra.
Crossovers inside our knees, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Please, don't be stiff. I don't want.
Quindi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Seconds and go. 1, 2, 3, step across. Good. Keep it going. Keep it going.
Basketball was introduced to me at 10 years old. I started out in a similar fashion at my local YMCA, my local community center. But I want to say a little bit before I get started about myself, what you guys have done. You know, over the last hour and a half, we've got a chance, you guys got a chance to be introduced to combine drills, stuff that I didn't get a chance to experience until I got to the NBA. So you guys are getting a huge advantage with EPLAY, having the opportunity to be exposed to these kind of combine drills.